Morning, students. In the last class, or rather in the last video, we had seen, or rather we had discussed how Robespierre Maximilian, his idea of pure republic was creating havoc in the French society, whereby thousands were being guillotined, that is, were being killed in almost like a textbook precision for whatever context the state could come up with, because the state wanted to impose a novel kind of republic state, a very pure kind of a republic state, whatever might have been the cost. But the people gradually got tired of this fanaticism, where you see your friends, your relatives, your neighbors getting butchered right on the streets of Paris in the name of bringing about pure republic. So this had to end, and it ended quite swiftly. That is, just within 3 years, that is in 1794, the main architect of Reign of Terror, who was Robespierre Maximilian, uh, he was himself beheaded right in the middle of Paris, because people had got sick of the human cost, which was excessively high. And then there was, of course, Robespierre was gone, his bunch of hooligans were gone, but it did not give any kind of political stability to France. France had been put into a corner whereby now the clergy had been made powerless. The king had been guillotined, that is, had been beheaded, so he was no more. The monarchy was not there. There was no king, there was no queen. Monarchy, yes, was there, but there was no king, there was no queen. Aristocrats had fled France because they feared for their lives, and before fleeing, they had already surrendered all their powers and privileges to the State General. So France was in the middle of chaos and anarchy, where there was no one who could provide that stability which every nation or society or a community needs, as we all know. Now, then at this point in time, there was this gentleman named in history as Napoleon Bonaparte, and is very famous in history as with this name. He rose into prominence. He was a military man, and even before, when people around 1794, he was quite famous because of his military pursuits. He was considered to be a great military general, and one thing was which made also very endearing to the people of France was that he was a self-made man. He had come from, and he came from very humble origins. From Italy, in fact. Napoleon Bonaparte, though considered to be the greatest hero of France, he was never born in France, interestingly. He was born in Italy. Okay, he came to France to study in the military college in France, and then he joined the French army. Okay, so that's how he rose into prominence. So he was a very famous man and very, very popular. And at that point in time, then you have to understand that when people saw all this confusion and chaos, the very powerful people from the French society, they started approaching Napoleon Bonaparte himself. It's not that Napoleon Bonaparte usurped the power in France, or got into assassinated some political opponents. Definitely not. In fact, the people themselves started approaching him, because he was considered to be a man of great charisma, a self-made man, and someone who could take France again to the heights of glory where it had been sometime in time. And Napoleon finally became the first consul in 1799. But I reiterate, it was not that he usurped the power in France. It is the people of France, the influential members of the Directory of France, the governing body, they started approaching him, and they wanted him to take over the reins of power. Now, Now, coming back to a bit of French Revolution, if you have to, in the last video, we had discussed about what French Revolution had achieved. Now, one of the most important thing that French Revolution had achieved was that now it would be, the power would flow from the people. Okay. Now, in earlier times, the power flowed from the ruler, the emperor, the king. Every decision was made in his name, every decision was taken in his name. But now, after the French Revolution, it was the power flowed from the people. The decisions would be made in the name of people. Okay, now imagine a situation. You have people being proclaimed as suddenly very powerful and the fountainhead of everything, but there is no political system to exercise all that. Okay, because there was a reign of terror on the streets of France. Now, you do not expect people who have been oppressed and subservient for centuries and centuries and centuries, and just suddenly you make a constitution, use and give him, and suddenly proclaim that you happen to be the fountainhead of all the decision making in France, and suddenly people realize, okay, we are the most powerful people, and so we know how to rule France. It was not going to be so. Now, so that is why you had a situation whereby the transition was not at all stable. The transition, no one had no one had a plan as to what would happen. That's at least now, retrospectively, that's what we can come to a decision, that no one knew what would happen once you get, and no one had planned properly as to what would happen once you get rid of the king, once you get rid of the aristocracy, the church, clergy. Once you send everyone packing, what are you gonna do? Now, that is something which had not been chalked out properly, and that's why you had that reign of terror. So now you had a system where the administrative system was put in place and the laws were uniform for all the citizens, but it was all in theory. You needed someone to execute these ideals. You needed someone to walk that talk, to convert this letter into spirit and into reality. And that's where Napoleon came in. And when he became the most powerful man in France, uh, uh, and he, no one quite objected to it because people were tired of that power vacuum. So once Napoleon came to the power, he definitely naturally had he was a very nationalistic man, and he had this idea that the idea of revolution which had happened in France should be taken also to different parts of Europe, because as everyone rightly knew, that the same situation existed in different French societies, whether it was Italy, whether it was Holland or Austria or Germany, under different rulers, just that the ruling families were different, and the aristocrats had different titles and different titles, but essentially the condition of the peasants was same, and Napoleon understood that, and that's why he wanted to take his revolution, the French Revolution, the ideals of French Revolution, the gains of French Revolution to different parts of European civilization. Now, it is obvious, students, that the old structure in these monarchies, they are not going to welcome Napoleon Bonaparte as a messenger of great peace and a messenger of great ideals and philosophies. No, they all had their own power centers and power groups, and when Napoleon started entering into different parts of Europe, wanted to take the gains and the ideals of democracy into and revolution to those societies, there was enormous amount of resistance from the ruling societies and families which had been ruling those respective kingdoms for centuries again. Okay, now one of the like the countries, his French army started entering into Holland and Belgium and Italy and Switzerland. In fact, when I talk about Italy, it is very interesting to know. Some of you might be, I don't know, but it's very interesting to know that Napoleon Bonaparte is the one who is credited, who is given the credit for designing the national flag of France. And Napoleon Bonaparte was also the same guy who designed the national flag of Italy. So he designed the national flag of France as well as Italy. And even to this day, both the countries, France, of course, but even Italy has not made any changes in the national flag which Napoleon had designed. Okay, now, so Napoleon was surely very popular among the people of France. He wanted to take his idea of revolution to different parts of Europe, and because he had seen firsthand that France was not a perfect society. It needed a lot of changes to be made, and that is why in 1804 he brought about the Civil Code, which is also very famously in history known as the Napoleonic Code, whereby he brought about path-breaking changes, like all the privileges that were based on birth. Napoleon got rid of them. Okay, he brought about standardization in the justice system, standardization in the merit system, in the civil bureaucracy. It was now not about that someone having, just because you happen to be born in a rich and an affluent family, you would automatically be entitled to privileges. No. Napoleon was very keen in making France a nation of merit, whereby meritocracy would be the new way of life. Thank you.